Okay, so we're going to have some stragglers here, but I can probably just start to cover some of the ground rules. People are going to be muted, and so hopefully we can address things on an individual basis if we need to, if people miss this part. But my name is Brian. I'm with the Psychedelic Society of Minnesota, so it sounds like probably some of you haven't heard about us. So hello. So we're in Minnesota in the United States, and we have just about 1,300 members, coming up on 1,400 members now. But we've definitely expanded our circle during quarantine with these online events, which are always really fun to get everybody together. It's kind of cool to get this like international representation from different parts of the country. So it sounds like we have a couple different continents present. Welcome, everyone. If you are curious about us, you can go to psychedelicmn.com. There's a supporting membership that we have available where you teamed up with some local artists and have these cool goodies if you get a supporting membership. And then they also got a discount on this event, which was on the sliding scale basis. And then where you hear about our events is through meetup.com. And if you just search Psychedelic Society of Minnesota. I do just want to say just a couple of rules. So we are going to have everybody muted and video off during the presentation. So in just a little bit here, I'm going to have everybody turn their own video off. If you're having trouble with that, one of our moderators can help you out and we'll do it for you. But it does make the bandwidth go a little bit faster and it's a little bit less distracting. We are recording this event, so just keep that in mind. So the chat is recorded as well as the video, and we will be releasing it to ticket holders afterwards, as well as the supporting members of the Psychedelic Society. So if you are not comfortable being on video when it's recorded, I would go ahead and turn your video off now, and we could always cut this part. Okay, so feel free to ask questions. Like I said, I'll try to compile them. The chat is actually moving pretty fast, so that it's possible that I miss it. So if we get to the Q&A and you had a question that I did miss, feel free to type it in again. I won't be offended, but I will do my best. And I think what we're going to do is probably stay muted, but video on during the chat Q&A part after the presentation, and I will refresh you on that later. One more thing just to cover, this is always a rule at the Psychedelic Society events, is just please no sourcing illegal substances. Psilocybin is illegal in most areas in the world. We are working on changing that, whether through decriminalization or hopefully full legalization at some point. But for now, just please don't talk about, where to buy, how to grow, things like that. We will keep that out of these events. Okay, so we have Michelle here, Michelle Janikian. Who is a journalist and author of the new hit book, Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion, that's taking the psychedelic community by storm. So if you're ready, Michelle, you can just get right to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a sweet intro. I really appreciate it. Cool. So yeah, I wanted to just start by thanking Brian Eber and the Psychedelic Society in Minnesota for inviting me and hosting this event. It's just really an honor to address these psychedelic societies around the country and the world, and to spread this information to more people. And to thank all you guys for coming. It's so amazing. I really appreciate it. And I just really hope you guys learned something, and you can always, ask questions at the end, and I'm very available on social media and stuff for further questions. But yeah, I'm Michelle Janikian. I am a journalist. I've been covering cannabis and psychedelics for a while now, and I'm the author of this book. If you haven't gotten a copy, it's Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion. It's meant to be a guide on everything you need to know before embarking on your first psychedelic psilocybin mushroom experience, and so that you can use mushrooms in a safe, responsible, and intentional way. Oops, here we go. So yeah, I've been covering, mostly drug, psychedelic, cannabis, education from more of like a health and wellness and culture angle for the past 5 years with cannabis, 2-3 for psychedelics. And I'm also a harm reduction advocate. I believe in safe, responsible use and getting this kind of information out there, because I am a cannabis and psychedelics consumer. I'm personally out. You don't have to come out yourself, but I really believe that, really trying to destigmatize safe use. And I really believe in providing safe use info that's honest and, doesn't perpetuate stigma and shame to the person who is embarking on this kind of work. Or with any kind of, drug use. I feel that when we are ashamed and we use in secret, or for, we mix substances without telling people, that's when a lot more harm can happen. And, in the case of psilocybin mushrooms, they are quite a bit safer physiologically than we were taught in the American schools of DARE education. However, we're also not taught how to use them in a safe and responsible way that, reduces the possibility of risk and, maximizes benefits. And that's hopefully where the book comes in this presentation, to try to just make this information more clear. Because for me, learning how to use mushrooms in a way that makes me feel really safe and comfortable and secure has really helped to transform the experience. When I was younger, I wasn't always using psychedelics in such an intentional way, and it's really changed the whole experience for me to follow some of this stuff and to just give everything I do before a psychedelic journey some thought. It's really, it's not about getting super high or something like that for me. It's really more about learning about myself, learning to see myself in my life and how I live my life and life in general with more clarity. I have personally dealt with depression and anxiety since I was a teen. I still struggle, and I'm not totally cured by psychedelics, like some of these transformational stories you hear, but I can still struggle with anxiety and stuff. But through psychedelics, I've seen that a lot of those, insecure feelings that I have are deeply rooted in this idea that I've internalized that I'm a stupid and unworthy and incapable person. And but with mushrooms, I saw that that's not true in slightest. That I'm the hardest person on myself, but that I am truly worthy and capable of anything that I want to do, that I'm the only one, and my insecurity and anxiety is the only thing that holds me back. And it hasn't been a quick fix. I didn't change overnight with one big mushroom trip, but psychedelics can help me see my feelings and the reason for them more clearly, and they give me a little bit more space when I am feeling really down. And help me bring myself back up, not by taking them, but by remembering those powerfully beautiful and self-love experiences that I've had. Give me more space when I do feel overwhelmed by anxiety. And they're also helping me unlearn some of those things that I internalized at a young age. And now and I'm in this process of, being the best and most authentic version of myself that I can be. And it's helping me a lot. And I just wanted to share these safe use practices with other folks who are maybe interested in doing some similar work. But I do have to say first that, I am not encouraging anyone to take psychedelics. I know this sounds really positive, but this is for informational purposes only, because most psychedelics in most places are still illegal. But I am a firm believer in cognitive liberty and just getting stigma-free information out there. And, if you've already decided you want to try this stuff, you're epically curious, I just want to provide you all with honest information so you can make an informed decision for yourself. And if you think this is silly, why is a fungus that grows in, I think, every continent except Antarctica illegal? You can help to change that by joining a decriminalization initiative in your area. I know Decriminalize Minneapolis is also quite involved with the Minnesota Psychedelic Society, but there are decriminalized nature initiatives, popping up all around the US, Canada, I bet in the UK, although I haven't checked. And, or you can start one, and that can really help to move this process forward and try to decriminalize these substances that can probably benefit a lot of people. And also, before we get to some of the more good stuff, I do have to say that when we talk about psychedelics being safe physiologically, we are talking about for healthy individuals. And so for folks with chronic mental and physical health conditions or who are on daily medication, you are going to have to double check with a doctor, do some research to make sure that this stuff is also safe for you. Here, I have a list here of some potential contraindications. None of these are a hard no, but these are the kinds of issues that if you do need to do more research, maybe talk to a doctor, or maybe you'll need some extra support during your journey or afterward. And just something to keep in mind. These are things you have to know before getting into such an intense experience. But folks with heart conditions, folks with a psychotic spectrum disorder, which is like schizophrenia, or family history, pregnant or breastfeeding people, people on daily medication like an SSRI or SNRI medication, and other chronic mental and physical health conditions. These conditions, you do need to take a little bit more consideration before embarking on a psychedelic mushroom experience. But besides that, common side effects for healthy individuals, besides, the very real possibility of having a challenging trip and difficult material coming up, the side effects are pretty straightforward. Nausea is quite common, as is anxiety and trouble sleeping. And the anxiety and the nausea are, they do often come up in like the first 2 hours of the experience when you're starting to feel the mushrooms. We call that the come up, like if it's like an arc. I'll do it more like here. But some of the navigation skills we're going to go through in the middle of the presentation, like breathing and accepting, will help you get through it. And then afterwards, trouble sleeping is common, but I honestly feel like after mushrooms, it's a little easier to sleep than maybe after some other psychedelic substances and stuff like that. But, and I wanted to say with the nausea thing, there are some ways to combat that if you are worried about that really interfering with your experience. I personally do get pretty nauseous just in general. And I've found that not drinking alcohol like the whole week before I plan a psychedelic or mushroom journey really helps. Also, I try to not eat mushrooms on a full stomach. I will take them, I don't like totally fast. I'll have like one light meal that day and wait 3 or 4 hours and then take them. And I find that reduces my nausea and chance of vomiting, but I still have like my blood sugar levels healthy and stuff like that. And yeah, if you have more questions about that kind of stuff, you can ask me at the end. But cool. So what are mushrooms used for? I have this really long list here. Folks at home are using mushrooms for a lot of different reasons, mental health and healing, personal growth, spirituality and ceremony, fun and curiosity, peak experiences, creativity, a reset, which can mean like a lot of different things, but I find that because mushrooms do alter your consciousness and your sense of time so much that when you come back and you're, back to normal, it just feels like so much has happened and so much time has passed. Kind of like when you come home from a week or 2 week long vacation and you feel really refreshed and remotivated. It's a similar kind of feeling sometimes coming back from a mushroom journey. And there is more to this in like the depression literature on how, your brain might be like reset in this way that can really help you move forward and kind of get you out of your ruts and your, negative self-talk that's kind of keeping you down. Sometimes after a strong mushroom trip, you can feel a little have relief from that for a period of time, and that can really be helpful. One of the main reasons I go into a mushroom experience is for perspective and insight on things. Some things I go in intentionally looking for perspective on. Some things just come up when I'm in the experience, and then I know that these are things that maybe I'm not dealing with as actively as I should, and might need a little bit more, emotional energy and engagement in my everyday life. Problem solving also, because you see things in a new way. Sometimes a mushroom experience can help you solve work or personal problems in a way. It can facilitate really deep connections. I always find really reconnected to myself, sometimes to different parts of myself or to my past. Folks also often really feel deeply connected to it with really close friends or some kind of healing circle. They can also facilitate quite a deep connection with Mother Nature and this planet or the universe, or life in general. You can kind of feel in tune to this like greater scheme, this plan, and feel this really deep purpose and meaningfulness when you're in the experience. And it also can help like with unlearning and breaking unhealthy patterns, and also like starting new habits, maybe healthier habits. And this is like, and in clinical trials, there's a lot more. And I do like to say before I even go through this list that taking mushrooms, outside of a clinical trial or some kind of clinic experience is a bit different. Like, I don't want to say that you can heal your treatment-resistant depression by taking mushrooms on your own, but, you can still make some progress. However, I do like to warn folks that if you are dealing with a lot of mental health stuff, looking to these trials is exciting, and applying to them might be a good idea, but a lot of the results from a lot of this work is also due to all the therapeutic support folks are getting in this process, and you might want to create that kind of support for yourself. And we're going to talk about like integration therapists and this kind of stuff a little later on in the talk. But in clinical trials, psilocybin, not mushrooms, typically a synthetic psilocybin, is being used quite successfully for treatment-resistant depression, end-of-life anxiety, addiction, and quitting smoking cigarettes, OCD, cluster headaches and migraines, mystical experiences. There's upcoming trials on eating disorders, bipolar disorder, Parkinson's, chronic pain. I do imagine more like physical ailments would be on that list. There's going to be a lot of interesting work coming up. And so it's really fun to keep it. Help with all this stuff, like what? So part of it is that mushrooms can help increase your flexibility. And this is a photo here in the bottom of the photo of two brains. And this is from my book, this illustration, but it's a recreation from the Imperial College London's findings in brain scans on psilocybin. And on the left here, we have a brain that just a normal brain. And on the right, we have a brain under the influence of psilocybin. And you can see in the normal brain, there's just like a few lines. And these are like the connections that normally happen in our brain. If you think about a normal day, you probably think about a lot of the same things. You do a lot of the same things, like habits, and maybe not all of them are positive, like negative self-talk and anxiety and stuff like that. But we can kind of get stuck in just kind of like thought ruts. And on psilocybin, like the really exciting thing to me is that all these new parts of the brain talk to each other that don't usually. And the idea is that maybe that's like how some of the insights and perspectives, this perspective shift you get, the visual distortions you can see, maybe this is the cause of that. But another really interesting part about this change in your brain and this time is that, you know, um, it can kind of not only make your brain like more flexible in this moment, but you can kind of like your personality can become a little bit more flexible. There was a study from Johns Hopkins, um, and Catherine McLean was the main author on it, that found that one of the only personality changes they found when they gave their study participants a personality test, like 6 months after a strong psilocybin trip, was that they were more open. That was the only main personality change. And the personality trait of openness is related to things like seeing things from another point of view, or sorry, uh, being able to like reflect on others' opinions, or just like um, I lost my train of thought, but it's like a sign of maturity and wisdom, and and that can help you be more flexible in your everyday life by uh, sorry, I just heard someone. um, uh, yeah, like not react to things in such a way, not be so rigid in your thinking and your reactions, to be more open, to be more empathetic. And that perspective shift that you can get can also help lead to this kind of like mood or outlook shift, and that's something you can hear. And also, like, this, it's kind of interesting, this increased connectedness in the brain, that also a common experience folks have is feeling more connected to the universe, or to themselves. And so you know and that can also, in turn, like if you feel more connected, you could have less feelings of loneliness and isolation and hopelessness afterwards. And for me and others I interviewed for my book, mushrooms sometimes give me this sense that, like, all the things that I worry so much about in everyday life, that stress me out, that feel like life and death situations in my head, I can kind of see on mushrooms that they're actually like kind of petty. They're not that big of a deal. They're not really worth all that energy, like in the grand scheme of things. And that can just like give me a little bit more room to breathe and slow down later on, weeks later, when I am starting to feel all stressed out again. I can just kind of remember that feeling and realize this isn't the end of the world. It's going to be okay. I can miss a deadline. I probably won't get fired. But yeah, and this is mostly like moderate dose work. People are using microdoses for even more reasons. And I'm going to talk a little bit about microdosing later, but yeah, I just like to go over some of this stuff first because I find it really interesting. And, before we get into how to take psychedelics, I do like to recognize that mushrooms have been used in ceremony by indigenous people for probably thousands of years, maybe longer. But they are still used today in indigenous communities in Mexico. The Mazatec people of Oaxaca, Mexico, are considered the most knowledgeable about ceremonial mushroom use, but there are other indigenous groups as well that use them. This is a quote at the top here from my source in Huautla de Jimenez, Inti Garcia Flores. He is a archivist and a professor from the Sierra Mazateca. He is a Mazatec person. He'll be presenting at the Psilocybin Summit next week. I'm really excited to hear his talk. But he's been teaching me a lot. I want to thank him and his aunt, Leo, about the Mazatec use of mushrooms. And the Mazatec consider mushrooms incredibly sacred. It is a really big part of their spirituality, and they revere mushrooms very strongly. They don't take it lightly at all. And mushrooms are often they're taken in ceremony with a curandero, and which is a healer. The verb curar is to heal. And but mushroom ceremonies are used for healing, like both spiritual and physical and mental health stuff, but also for divination, which is things like seeing the future, talking with the dead, and finding lost people and objects. Um, and these ceremonies are there's a lot to them. They're held on specific days of the week for different uses, and like there are specific days for the living and the dead, specific days of the moon cycle. The full moon is considered like a very powerful day to use mushrooms. They're typically taken in the curandero's home. The ceremony is set up in front of the altar in the curandero's home. Prayer is very common during the ceremony, as is chanting, sometimes singing. It is a very syncretic tradition, so the prayers are like it's like a mix of Catholicism and their more ancient spiritual beliefs of like the protectors of the mountains and the region. And so while they're often praying to different saints, and there's photos of saints in Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary, they can also often mean both, like San Pablo and a specific spirit guardian of theirs, or Chicon as it's called in the Mazatec language. It's really fascinating. But I think it's just really important to pay respect and to learn about ceremonial use, because mushrooms and other plant medicines, actually the curanderos use a lot of different plant medicines, not all of them psychedelic, in the Sierra Mazateca, and they're all revered very strongly for their power. And I think it's important to learn to preserve this reverence and respect and sacredness for the mushrooms, because they are strong. They can produce incredibly strong experiences that can be very spiritual or hard to explain. And preparation is incredibly important. And yeah, we have a lot to learn and to thank the Mazatec and the other indigenous groups for. Okay, so how do you take psilocybin mushrooms in the safest possible way? I didn't always use psychedelics with so much intentionality. As I wrote in the intro to my book, the first time I took mushrooms, I had no idea what I was getting into. I was totally unprepared for what I call the magnitude of the experience. Because as you learn when you start taking mushrooms, it's not really some kind of like trippy escape with cool colors and no worries, like sometimes it's shown in the movies. But especially with mushrooms, I find it to be deeply personal and emotional. Like I never cry so much sometimes as when I take mushrooms. And that can be beautiful, and it can be euphoric and mystical and fun. You can laugh, but it's also possibly difficult and full of things like unresolved grief, sadness, and shame. And so, to initiate yourself into this deep and profound place, don't do what I did and just like stuff an eighth of mushrooms down your throat in a suburban parking lot. Like mistake number one. The trick is to really prepare your mind and your body and your surroundings to be just as pleasant and stress-free and possibly like sacred and beautiful as possible, so you can have a sacred and significant event that you're ready and willing for, instead of one that just like takes you over like a tidal wave. And so, yeah, all the following advice I'm about to go through is to help you reduce harm and maximize benefits. Because being in a safe, comfortable environment, in the right state of mind, and on the right dose is crucial to avoiding, bad trip situations, which we'll talk about, but more like unnecessary stressors and other kinds of like potential harm and accidents when you're in that sensitive state of mind. And then you could possibly have a more enlightening experience like this illustration. Here, this is an original illustration by Max Loffer for Playboy, illustrating a trip I had that I wrote about for Playboy last fall. The article was called Bliss Your Heart. And I had on 4 grams of golden teachers at a retreat here in Mexico, I had a really powerful, I think almost mystical type experience where I felt like a ball of light that just could do anything. And all my worries were silly and all my problems were like silly human problems. And I laughed quite hard at just how upset I can get about things so easily. And, you know, it was after having a pretty challenging experience in an earlier ceremony and getting over some of the more difficult stuff I was dealing with. And just being able to release to it all and accept it, I had this profoundly beautiful feeling inside of me that I still access and reference when I'm feeling overwhelmed and full of dread, and I'm really grateful for. So, set and setting. What is set and setting? What am I talking about? So this is like one of the most basic psychedelic harm reduction concepts. People love to tell me that they don't like psychedelics, and then they explain to me these like totally stressful trips in busy locations surrounded by people, and I just want to yell, like, it's not psychedelics that you don't like. It's probably you just didn't know anything about set and setting. This is like set and setting 101. I think that's super common because like before you take a psychedelic, you don't really know how much your environment really deeply influences and impacts your experience. And so set and setting stands for set is your mindset going into the experience. And that includes your mood the day of, your expectations for the trip, but it's like so much more than that. It's like your whole personal history, your deeply held beliefs, your upbringing, stuff you don't even aren't fully aware that you feel. It's all part of your set. And your setting is a little easier to comprehend. It's your physical and social environment. So who you're with and where you're at. Excuse me. It was coined in the early 60s by Timothy Leary in this book, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is the first guide on how to use psychedelics. Lots of information in there, definitely worth revisiting. But the key is to feel as safe, relaxed, and comfortable as you can. And that way you can surrender to the experience rather than worrying about your surroundings or, you know, what's going to happen later or whatever. It'll be easier to release your control and to just like go with the trip if you feel like everything's safe and taken care of and it doesn't need your attention and you can just focus on you and relax and float downstream, as Timothy Leary would have said. So I'm about to go into ways you can prep your set and setting, and some of it might seem like a little obvious, but the key is to just give it all some thought, like prep everything with intention, and give it some time and don't like rush into it. And that can really make all the difference between like a blah, weird, stressful trip and a kind of beautiful or possibly transcendental type experience. So, ways to prepare your setting. I'm going to do setting first because I find it's just like a little easier to understand than set. But so the first thing I like to tell people when you're, you know, considering your ideal setting, you're preparing your ideal setting, is who are you going to have this experience with? Choose the right people. And if you're trying to decide this, I think the first thing to think about is like actually whether you want to have this experience with other people, or if you want to do it, have a more inward focused experience where you also have a trip sitter, someone who knows what you're doing. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But, you know, I think that's okay if you want to do this journey work on your own with a trip sitter. Sometimes this is pretty deeply personal stuff, and it is a little easier to go into it and really feel it and like go to it when you're on your own. But also tripping with other people, or, you know, doing journey work in groups can also be really beneficial and powerful. And if that appeals to you, and you can also like go inward when you are doing journey work in a group. You just have to like tell your friends or the ceremonial circle that that's like what you plan on doing. And so, yeah, if you want to do this with other people, my main suggestions are to keep it super small and intimate. You know, just a couple people, not a huge group or party situation. That gets too stressful. People you trust with your life, like the core group, your best friends, your partner, maybe like a sibling, maybe other members of your family. But to, yeah, people you trust with like your life. And to communicate your expectations and your boundaries beforehand. So if you're like, yeah, thinking you want to do a lot of inward work, but you also want to do it with your partner, just tell them that, like, oh, I think I'm going to spend a lot of the time, you know, in the bedroom listening to music, thinking about my past or like whatever. You know, the key is in doing this work in groups is to communicate everything beforehand, so nothing comes as a surprise when you're on the medicine, when you're actually feeling the psilocybin, because yeah, you just don't want any like uncertainty or any weirdness to come up. So to just make everything as transparent as possible really helps. Yeah, for me, I personally only like to do this work. I do a lot of solo work, but also just like with my partner, really close friends, people I can be myself with, be myself around, like no matter what. Otherwise, I can get increased anxiety and I can't really let go to the experience like I would like to. Oh, and real quick, some going inward techniques I wanted to just go over really fast is like if you are interested in doing more inward focused work, um, a lot of folks find that you know, wearing an eye mask, so like for sleeping, or they have special ones for meditation. I think Mindfold is a company that makes a nice meditative one. Wearing an eye mask and headphones with music helps them really like go deep inside. And you, when you close your eyes, you can also kind of have some kind of like visions. You can kind of like go places. It can be really powerful. It's a bit easier to recall than a dream, this state. I personally don't often wear an eye mask, but I'll just like lie somewhere comfortable with pretty lights and listen to music out of speakers. But you know, everyone has like different techniques. I think you can still like do inward work even if you're not lying down closing your eyes. You could like walk through your garden and just admire the plants and still get like inward insights and stuff. And then of course there is the Terence McKenna recommendation of, you know, sitting in silence in a dark room on a heroic dose. We'll get to dose numbers later. I never really recommend heroic doses, but you might want to try silence and darkness, at least for a little while, if that appeals to you. These are just different things that people can try. Okay, next up is, where are you going to have this experience? And like, do you want to go do an indoor trip or an outdoor trip? And, you know, I think the first thing when you're trying to decide this is to think, where are you the absolute most comfortable? And for many, that's at home. And I think that's totally okay. I think there's some kind of misconception that you have to like go travel to some beautiful place on a lake with a mountain in the background or something to have a journey. And like, while journeying outside can be really magical and beautiful, it's more of an advanced skill. So if you're someone that's, you know, listening and reading the book because you have never journeyed and this is your first time, like there's no need to go out and do this somewhere public or somewhere not at home. I think where you feel, if you feel the safest at home, that's probably your best bet. But you know, when you do get more advanced and you know, you get more used to how mushrooms feel in your mind and body, then maybe finding a private outdoor campsite or cabin or some kind of maybe Airbnb with a big outdoor garden or something. That could be a really magical experience. You could connect with nature and see nature in a really deep and profound way that is very valuable. But like I said, it's a little bit more of an advanced skill, I think. So if you are staying home, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of the folks I interviewed for my book told me that's exactly what they do because that's what they're most comfortable doing. And for them, they like to do a couple of things first. With the number one thing everyone told me was that they like to clean and tidy their house first before they have an at-home journey, which I thought was funny, but also like totally, I do that too. There's just something about journeying in a cluttered or grimy or just dirty environment that can just make your trip a little unnecessarily cluttered or stressy in a way, especially if you're like me and if you see something messy, like you want to go clean it and then it's just like this whole thing. And so, yeah, tidy up a little, just do the normal Saturday morning clean, get the bathroom clean, no dishes in the sink, sweep the floor maybe, I don't really know, whatever you do. Make it feel like you're prepping the house for the mushrooms. They're your honored guests, right? And you could take it a little step further and like maybe decorate or prepare a little. You don't have to go too crazy, but one thing that I personally like to do is set up some nice lighting. So I like candle light is like a nice one. But one safety thing I recommend is don't use candlesticks like this. It's not safe, right? Always use candles in jars like this. It's just safer if it's on your altar, like whatever. And also it's just like your eyes can be really sensitive to light when you're on mushrooms. And so like dim lighting can be really nice. And if you want to take it to another level, a really pretty kind of special thing you can do is hang up some fairy lights. I have some here. These, you can buy them online. They're usually battery powered and they come on like this wire, so you can just like hang them anywhere. Kind of like this photo, although that's not my house, but I really liked what they did here, where they put the fairy lights over the bed. It just makes it feel more special, more magical, and for such a meaningful feeling experience, anything you can do to make it feel a little bit more special, just it's really nice, I think. You could also set up some activities and supplies. So there are some things that can be kind of fun to do on mushrooms or can like help you work through some energy if you feel a bit stuck. And so a lot of, when I interviewed just like regular mushroom people, users for my book, a lot of folks told me that they like to set up some art supplies. Maybe one person told me she has this adult coloring book that she loves to use, and that it's become like a kind of trip journal of sorts, which is super cool. People like coloring in mandalas, but other stuff like making, playing music, like tambourines, even if you're not a musician, like kind of like percussion stuff can be a fun way, especially if you're feeling stuck or a little sad, to try to like move that negative energy, that heavy energy around. Also like looking at art, nature photography can be really nice if you have art books or, textiles, stuff like that can be really cool. And my main recommendation, if this kind of stuff sounds good to you, is to set it all up before you eat your mushrooms, like when you're tidying or the night before or something, because something about the way mushrooms makes you feel, just going to find stuff like your favorite nature photography book or your coloring book and the crayons and the coloring pencils or whatever, like when you're journeying, that can just kind of feel overwhelming and like too much. And so I like to just like set it all up first, put the journal on the kitchen table, the art books on the coffee table. If I, wanted to do some like musical instruments, maybe set them up as well, set the lighting up, make sure everything's just like out and easy to access. Some folks told me they love to like build forts with their partner when they're on mushrooms and then like go in them and like share secrets because they feel so much like a kid again. Other couples told me they love to like engage each other with like silk and soft things, because you can feel your senses in this new way, and it can just be really magical to, like, I don't know, touch a feather or something like that. So these kinds of things can be really nice, and yeah, just get it all set up first. Oh, and lastly, music. This could be its whole presentation, but journey music, or just like music in general, can really influence your experience and your mood during the experience. And so I like to prepare a few different playlists that I can just switch. So I'll have a playlist that's like maybe pretty serious spiritual journey music. But then I'll have another more like upbeat playlist, of just like some other genre. I've been listening to cumbia lately. That might not be for you, but like, it'll be a personal preference. But the idea here is that when I'm getting bored of my music during a journey, or I'm feeling like it's bringing me down, it's too serious, I want something more upbeat. If I go to my Spotify or my iTunes looking for just like a new band or song, it can just be really overwhelming. It's just like too much input. I'm like, ugh. And so I've found that it's just easier to just like set up a bunch of different playlists, and then I can switch between playlists and done. I don't really have to make a lot of choices. And my last tip about music is, if you listen to most of your music on your phone, I like to download all the playlists and make them offline. And so that way I can keep my phone on airplane mode during my journey, and I'm not getting like notifications or text messages or whatever. Like, no, I don't want any of that real world stuff seeping into my journey. I really just want to have, I don't want to go on my phone much at all, but if I have to just like switch the playlist on Spotify, at least, I'm still on airplane mode and everything was downloaded the night before on offline mode. And I just find that personally helps. And yeah, as far as the type of music, that's going to be an individual preference. But a lot of folks do prefer stuff without lyrics. Classical music's popular, spiritual drumming, flutes can be cool, but like electronic, trancey stuff can be cool. It is a lot of like kind of a trial and error thing that you'll learn your preferences more as time goes on. And there's also like a lot of playlists online for journey work, and a lot of articles coming out on this stuff too that I can refer you guys to at the end, because the whole music thing, people keep asking me about it, and there is a lot to it. Okay. Anyway, ways to prepare your mindset. Okay, so the first one, and the most important one, is intentions. And so one of the main ways that you can prepare your mind is to set an intention for your journey. And an intention is, what is your goal in using mushrooms? What's your reason for having this experience? Excuse me. And that can help you, but it can also influence your trip a lot. So I say give it a lot of thought. Do it with intention. It can also ground you during your experience. So if you start to get a little bit confused, or you're like, oh, this is terrible, I don't know, that's possible. Or confusion, disorientation are real possibilities. You can remember you can go back to your intention, or you can read it. If you've written it down, you can put it on a Post-it note in your house, and you can go back to it and be like, this is why I'm doing this. And that can help ground you and get you back into a more grounded place. Personally, what I found with my intentions is that I've learned to not set too many or make them too complicated. Because when I go in and I write like a laundry list of things that I want to change about myself. I'm like, oh, this has to go, and I need to do this, and da 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 da. Then I have these like pretty overwhelming and complicated trips, and they can just be a lot, and I can spend a lot of time crying, and it's not a bad thing. I still learn a lot from it, but I found to have more focused trips that are less overwhelming is I set really simple intentions that really emphasize my openness, um, and to the experience, and my openness to accept whatever the experience gives me, no matter what. And so I've been setting the same intention lately in a lot of my journey work, and it's just teach me I'm listening. I'm talking to the mushrooms in that intention, and yeah, it's really helped me to just accept the lessons the mushrooms think need to come up when I am in the space, and to not direct the experience too much in a particular way, because that can kind of lead to some kinds of resistance and other stressful experiences, in my opinion. So journaling, I think, is like one of these least you can do things that can really maximize the benefits of journeying on psychedelic mushrooms or other medicines. So I recommend folks start journaling before your trip, and to actually maybe even buy a journal that's like specifically for your psychedelic work. That can just make it special, and can just like also just motivate you to use it. If you like buy this nice Moleskine or whatever, you're like, oh, I got to use this. It cost me $20. No, but I think that just like makes it special. And then all your journey work is in one place. And so, yeah, I say journal beforehand and just free write. Just explore your feelings about the upcoming journey, your expectations. And if you're struggling to create intentions during this free write, you'll probably they'll probably come up, and you can explore your intentions more deeply. And then you can have the journal around for your experience while you're using mushrooms, but don't beat yourself up if you can't be doing too much journaling. Honestly, something about from forming the words in your head to your hand to the paper can just be a lot. Don't push yourself, but have it around. If you have some insights, write it down. Sometimes I do have some funny insights like written in the middle of the page, and it's just like, oh God, what was the one I had? Oh, doubt is stupid. I had just on a page in my journal, and it still gives me strength to just remember that totally self-doubt-less feeling I had was beautiful. But so journaling can also, and then I really recommend, and I'm going to talk about this a little more when we talk about integration, but I really recommend journaling after the experience. So, afterwards, if you can't sleep or whatever, maybe do some journaling, or especially that next day, then really start to journal some of those insights, the experiences, anything you want. Start to make meaning of it. Just get some details down. How do you feel today? And, keep journaling that week after. And I really find that reviewing those entries is really helpful down the line, or before you go on your next journey, maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later. Read those entries from your last experience and see how much you've learned since then, or how you felt that next day, how you felt before that first journey. It's really helpful, and you can keep revisiting these entries and learning from them for years to come. Ceremony and ritual is another way to prepare your set. You can create your own ceremony, routine. You can build your own altar. And this can just kind of like we call it creating a container in the psychedelic world. But what it means is it like marks the event as a significant one in your life. Like how you plan a wedding and you go to it and you get all dressed up because you're marking this day as a significant one where things are happening. And same with a journey on mushrooms. And that can also make it easier to process and integrate afterwards, like especially if it got confusing or something, that it was all part of the ceremonial container. This work you're doing can help ground you and center you during the experience, or going to your altar and sitting there and praying, or just looking at the candles and the flowers and the things you've put on it. That can be really helpful to ground you as well, to go there and do some praying or some chanting. Other folks, an altar is a quite spiritual thing that doesn't really appeal to everyone, but other folks who I interviewed told me that they develop little rituals and routines before their experience to help get them just like in the zone and ready for the mushrooms. And I had one woman told me that she loves to just kind of like get dressed up and do her makeup first, like adorn herself for the mushrooms. And that just like helps her get in the mood. And then if she does look in the mirror while she's on psychedelics, she's just more happy with what she sees. And, that I'm not going to talk about mirror work too much actually in this trip, but that's like a whole other thing. But, feeling your best, looking your best, like if that's something that appeals to you, if you're not a dress up makeup person, like, don't bother. But, if that's something that makes you feel good, that might be a good way to start. Or you could like make your mushrooms into a tea, and the process of like grinding them up and brewing the tea can be, just a nice ritual to center your mind, set your intentions while you're, doing the whole brew process. It's also another nice way to set up your set. Meditation, yoga, other spiritual practices. If you have one already, a lot of folks report doing this like right before their journey, or once they've eaten their mushrooms and they're waiting for it to kick in, and they can take like 45 minutes, sometimes longer, to start working. And that can be a really anxiety-filled time. You don't know what's about to happen. And so if you have a yoga practice, keep it really light and simple. Don't be like doing handstands when they're about to kick in, but simple stretches, connecting with your body, or just meditation, connecting with your breath, setting your intentions. Those can be really good ways to prepare. But really anything to relax and center yourself is going to help you go into this in a, open and accepting state of mind. So maybe that's a walk in nature. Maybe that's making art or static dance or playing guitar. I don't know, like people, whatever that is to you, taking a bubble bath. Just take time before you eat the mushrooms to relax and ground yourself and breathe. Don't rush into the experience in a stressed out mindset because you have all these other things to do and you just want to get this out of the way. Like that's probably going to be a pretty stressful trip. I also recommend no social media that morning if you can help it. Maybe try not reading the news. I know, like, blah, that can be hard, but just making that day about you or you and your partner, your tripping partners, and just relaxing. Okay, dose. To micro or macro dose? That is the question. So yeah, the next thing you need to do is decide what kind of dose you want to take. And before your very first psychedelic experience, especially, you want to think about, like, do you want to start with a subperceptual microdose or a more tripping macro dose at a low level? We're going to talk about exact numbers in a second. But so microdoses are so small that you barely feel them. They can be a good way to start, especially if you're nervous and you've never done work like this before. I think that they're a really good place to just start to get used to this stuff in your mind and your body. Folks report a lot of different things on microdoses. It often makes people feel a bit more open and connected, in tune or empathetic. It can kind of quiet the constant chatter a little bit in the mind, which people like for anxiety. It can make some folks more creative and productive, but it is a spectrum. Microdoses affect everyone differently. Some folks get nauseous. I'm one of those people, even on really low doses. It can make others more emotional. Like for some, more empathy is good, but for folks who are already really empathetic, it can be a little too much. It can make some folks distracted instead of productive. You can feel a little slightly high. And so I know there's a lot of talk in the media about microdosing and like going to work and doing all these normal things. But if this is your first time ever, I would say still prep your set and setting, still do all the preparation work. You might not have a super profound experience, but you still want to be in a comfortable place so you can really get used to how this feels in your body. And then you can decide how, if you want to incorporate that into your lifestyle in some way, or to, maybe move on to a higher dose. So I also think that it's safe for beginners to start in the low dose range. And that will produce more than a microdose, maybe tingly openness feeling. It's going to produce more signature psychedelic sensory changes, like possibly some visual distortions, which can include things kind of moving around, especially like textured walls or wood grains can kind of flow and dance and breathe, which can be disorienting, but it can also be really beautiful. You just gotta go with it. And feeling your mind and your body in a new way is possible. Again, can be disorienting for your first experience, but not necessarily a bad thing. But I have a whole chapter actually on what to expect, different doses and stuff in the book. But if you're looking, like, how do you decide if you should start with a micro or low dose? You got to ask yourself what you're looking for and how deep you want to go, but also like how ready you are to really release your control to this experience. And if you're not sure, or you're nervous of like what tripping feels like, what it will do to you, I say start in that microdose range. And like I said, I'm about to get to numbers, and start to just get acquainted how the mushrooms feel. And then you can move on into higher doses later. Last thing before I move on to the numbers, I wanted to show you guys a couple scales. So I think it's really important to weigh out your dose with an accurate scale. Don't just eyeball it and be like, well, these mushrooms look small, this must be a microdose. Like, no, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to do it safely and intentionally, right? So there's a couple scale options. The Gemini 20, this is what I have here. This is really good for milligrams, for like micro doses, and for other psychedelics that come as powders. This is a really accurate milligram scale. But for mushrooms, you might just want like a kitchen scale that reads down to the milligram. This is a pretty good one, and you can still weigh out doses that's like 1.25 if you wanted to, stuff like that. But this one's cheaper. The Gemini 20 is like $50-$60. This one's only like $20. I actually do use it in my kitchen for spices and stuff, but also for measuring out other things. And yeah, I think really important to weigh out your dose. Like harm reduction, like basic. Know the dose you're taking. Okay, so actual dose ranges. This is my opinion. I'm kind of conservative when it comes to doses. So I just like to say that, but I really believe, it's important to start low and go slow. Titrate your dose. There's no rush. Big doses aren't going anywhere. This is not a competition. If you want something a little bit more than a subperceptual dose, I say it's still safe to start in the low dose range. So here, I have microdoses are like 0.1, or honestly even lower, to 0.5 grams. And then the low dose range is from 0.5 to 2 grams of dried mushrooms. This is specifically for Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms. So if you are dealing with another species that you maybe forage, you do want to look up if they are like stronger than Psilocybe cubensis, then you might want to do less than this. Or if they're weaker, you get a feel for their strength in a low dose before moving on to something higher. But yeah, I think it's safe to stay under 2 grams for your first journey. You're still going to feel some psychedelic effects, but it's not going to be, it can be strong. It depends on how sensitive you are. Depends on the mushroom, how it was grown. But And then there's the moderate dose range, 2 to 3.5 grams. Now, there's this misconception in the community, or it's kind of like in the drug using community, that you should start with a full 3.5 gram eighth, because that's a full tripping dose. And I say it's a misconception because a lot of the folks I talked to for my book did this because that's how you buy them on the black market. It usually comes about 3.5 grams, and they ate the whole thing because that's what they were told to do. And it was really overwhelming. It was too much. It turned them off to mushrooms, even to some of these people who then like rediscovered mushrooms down the line again. But it was too overwhelming. And so I say in my, it's not for everyone. Maybe some folks want to start there, but in the safe, responsible way, I think start low, see how it feels, and work your way up to higher doses in subsequent trips if that appeals to you. You might never want to go above 1.5 grams. It might not be necessary for the work you want to do. But there are benefits of higher dose work. That's can be where some of the more mystical type experiences happen in the 3.5 to 5 gram and above range. There is much higher dose work out there, but I'm trying to keep this a little bit more for beginners. And so, those doses will always be there. They're a good goal to have. Someday you want to take 5 grams, but that could be like 5 years down the line. There is no rush at all. I think it's much better to be cautious. And a couple other things about these doses is this is for dried grams. So if you are eating wet, fresh mushrooms that you foraged, you want to times these numbers by 10 to account for all the water weight. Mushrooms are about 90% water when they're fresh. And so if you wanted a microdose of fresh mushrooms, that might be more like 1 to 5 grams. And a low dose would be 5 to 20 grams. It sounds like a lot, but it is mostly water. And to take that into account. And even though this is for Psilocybe cubensis, this dose range, even different strains can be stronger than others. And so, I'm kind of thinking about like Golden Teachers B+ when I'm thinking in these dose ranges. But if you're taking Penis Envy, terrible name, but a very strong psilocybin mushroom, a Psilocybe cubensis strain, you might want to take less. They're much stronger. People say they're like twice as strong as Golden Teachers, something like that. So, try to find out as much about your medicine as you can to figure out an appropriate dose. Cool. So, how to navigate the psychedelic space. I have this quote here: trust, let go, be open. This is a quote by, it's like what the Johns Hopkins researchers say, but I'm pretty sure it's a quote by Bill Richards. It's in his book, William Richards' Sacred Knowledge, which is a great book if you guys have never checked it out. And he was a psychedelic researcher back in Baltimore in like the 60s and 70s, and now is part again of the Renaissance. Has been working with Johns Hopkins since like 2000 or so when they started this research up again. And he also wrote, he helped write the guide for facilitators in these clinical trials. And this is what they tell participants: trust, let go, be open. Because you really have to be able to trust who you're with and yourself and in your surroundings. You have to be totally comfortable and trusting to be able to let go and, to be open and accept all of the possible experiences that come your way. The main idea is you don't fight the experience, even if it's not what you expected, or it's uncomfortable, or you're nauseous, or you hate the way it feels, or it's challenging and sad. Like, don't fight it. Don't wish it was over the whole time and count down the hours till it ends. I know that can be hard, but the trick is to just, let go to it and accept it, and not try to control it or resist it in some kind of way. No matter how weird it seems, just see where it goes. You're likely to have a better experience if you can just let go to it and trust that it's going to be okay. And a good way to do that is, instead of showing your experience like resistance and blah, I don't like this, like show your experience curiosity and compassion. Instead of being, if some memory comes up that's really embarrassing, instead of feeling shame, try to approach it with more compassion or curiosity. Why is this coming up for me right now? Or try to show your feelings forgiveness and love and appreciation, instead of negative reactions like fear or shame or guilt or anxiety. I know it can be hard, but when you do start to resist and get stuck, or you start having anxiety and wishing it was over or something like that, you can get stuck in what's called a negative thought loop. And this is basically when you can't stop thinking about some negative, anxious, worst case scenario type things. It's kind of paranoid thoughts. I mean, if you have anxiety, you probably get them sometimes just, outside of a psychedelic experience, and you just kind of get stuck in these thought loops. But, there are some things you can do if that happens. So I have some tips here, and I have a whole chapter about this stuff in the book. But if you do, start to get stuck in a negative thought loop, or things are getting challenging, like really tough, really sad, really dark, whatever, really confusing, disorienting, there are some things you can do. So the first thing is to breathe. It sounds really like obvious, and you're always breathing, right? But to breathe mindfully, I'm like starting to do it. To breathe with intention, to connect with your breath, just focus on your breath and breathe deeply and mindfully. There are some like breath work techniques you can do. Like I have one in my book, which is basically like inhaling through your nose and holding it for a few seconds, and then exhaling through your mouth for even longer than you inhaled. And you can count your breaths and do some kind of breath work like that. It can just help take your mind off things, help you recenter yourself. And of course, like, you also want to try to accept it, right? You want to try, instead of fighting it, or instead of trying to figure it out and finding a reason for all these thoughts you're having, like just try to accept them and just let them happen, and breathe through them. If that's really hard, it can be a good time to repeat a mantra of some kind, or go back to your intention and repeat that. Go to your altar and pray, can help. Another easy tip is to change the scenery, lighting, or music. So basically, if you are really having trouble sitting with your tough stuff and you can't see it through, there's like no rule that says you have to force yourself to like keep your eye mask on and do it. Like that can be a little too much, especially doing this work, on your own with just a friend trip sitting or something. So there's a couple things you can do. An easy one is to change the room. Like if you've been in the living room the whole time, maybe go into the bedroom. Or if you have the option of going outside, going from indoors to outdoors can pretty radically shift your mindset. But if you're in a small apartment, that could be maybe as simple as not lying on the couch and lying on the floor instead, or something, just changing it up. Because your environment does really strongly influence you when you're on mushrooms. And so just like going to a new room, or just changing the lighting, making it brighter, or if you have those cool smart bulbs, like changing the color, that can be really cool. And the music too, like I was saying, the music can really influence your mood. And so if the music is bringing you down and you're just like struggling, change the music. It can just like change the whole experience, change your whole thought process. It's pretty magical how susceptible you are in that mind state. You're kind of like a kid in a way. And just like changing these things, if you're feeling stuck, right? It doesn't even have to be like you're in a negative thought loop. You're just kind of feeling stuck and mucky, like icky. It can just help you move, like transition from one place in your journey to the next. You can also just get up and walk around, that can help, shake, dance, get that tambourine out, get that shaker, do some chanting, that kind of stuff really helps. dancing, or if that's like way too much or a little far gone to be dancing, it's okay. Maybe just take your shoes and socks off and touch your bare feet to the ground and stand up. Um, or if you're outside, putting your bare feet in the grass can feel really nice. You can also, I say distractions here and activities, but like go to those activities you set up for yourself earlier when we were talking about prepping your setting. They can just be good ways to move through the energy. It's not exactly distracting yourself, don't feel bad about it, but it's just sometimes you just need a little help to, like I said, get to the next destination in your journey. So the musical instruments, the art supplies, the nature books, fresh cut flowers, things like that can just be helpful to just switch things up. You don't have to stay stuck. And of course, if you're with someone, tell them, because human contact and connection can also really help if you're in a really dark, place. A hug from if you're with your friends, your partner, or just holding hands if you're with a facilitator or a trip sitter, or just like maybe having a little conversation, taking your mind off it. If you're both on the medicine, you and your partner, and you're feeling a little sad, you don't want to bring them down with what you're feeling, you can maybe just be like, man, look at how goofy our dog looks, or like, I don't know, and just try to, you can just talk about something else. Okay, trip sitter. I've been saying this word a lot without defining it. So what is a trip sitter? What do I even mean? A trip sitter is a sober person that'll help to keep you safe and feeling secure. They can also help with everyday stuff like changing music, getting water, answering the door. And like, why do you need someone like that? Tripping can get confusing. It can get really disorienting. It can get scary, sad, lonely. But having a trusted person there to like hold the space of reality for you and to keep your physical body safe, and even if it feels like you're dying, that your friend is there keeping your physical body safe no matter what, it can help you through challenging moments safely. And it can also just make it easier to let go and release your control to the medicine, because someone is there taking care of all that other stuff for you. And so you don't have to think about it, and you can just really have your experience. It's one of the easiest ways to reduce the potential of harm, because like we keep saying, mushrooms aren't very dangerous, but you are in a different state of reality. So like accidents could happen, like just like silly little things. And if someone's there just like keeping you safe and watching out for you, like a preschool teacher does for really little kids, think of it like that. That can just be so helpful. And it's just a really easy way to reduce any potential for some kind of weird, dangerous situation coming up. Who makes a good trip sitter? Close friends, people you really trust, your partners, your roommate, if you guys are close, if you're roommates, family members, siblings, cousins, if you're friends, if you're close, those kinds of people that know you and love you, and that, those make really good trip sitters. People you can be yourself around. I'm not going to go into how to be a good trip sitter here, but I do have a whole chapter in the book. Chapter 12 is on holding space, and it goes through some of the basics. So if your close friend or your partner is like really interested in doing this, but they're like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know if I can really do this for you, have them, read the chapter, maybe do a little other homework on it, so you both feel prepared and there's no like uncertainty during your trip day. But even though there are training programs out there, if they're interested, I don't think extensive training is really necessary. The main thing is for a trip sitter to remain a calm and supportive and non-judgmental presence that sticks around for your whole experience. And yeah, it's just willing to help you out and during that like 6 to 8 hours. And it can just be a big help. And lastly, like, who needs a trip sitter? I mean, trip sitters are an easy way to reduce harm all the time. So you might want one for every journey. But for your first journey, definitely get a trip sitter. You can, like I say, it can be just like a partner or a friend or something that feels a little prepared. If you've been comfortable on low doses on your own, but you're curious about doing more high dose work, get a trip sitter for that. You know, a dose range you've never been in, or a new strain of mushroom, something like that. It can definitely help to have a trip sitter around so you can feel more secure to just release to it. And if you want to do mushrooms for mental health and healing, and you can't get into a clinical trial or something, definitely a trip sitter can help. You know, really dark stuff can come up. It can be hard to go through on your own. You know, suicidal ideation, things like that are not likely, but they're possible. And just having someone there to hold their hand and know someone cares about you when you're trying to face some of this harder stuff can be really, really helpful. But, you know, if you are planning on doing deeper work, a facilitated experience of some kind might be for you. You know, not everyone needs a facilitated experience, but they are really helpful for doing this deeper personal growth, mental health work. And so there's clinical trials. These are the most regulated. And the most well-researched, and you are going to get the highest level of support most likely in a clinical trial. But they are kind of hard to get into, and there's not a ton of them, although more and more are coming. So hopefully this really becomes a really realistic option for people. Or once we get beyond the phase, 3 clinical trials, and we actually have psilocybin assisted therapy, might even be legal soon in Oregon. We'll see. And so, yeah, that's definitely something to consider. You know, it might be expensive. Clinical trials right now are free, or sometimes you even get paid, which is really cool. But in the future, yeah, we'll see how accessible psilocybin therapy is, but hopefully it will be. And yeah, that's something we'll have to all just keep an eye on. But yeah, if you are looking to do more deeper mental health work, trauma work, definitely something to consider. There's also retreats abroad, and there are probably ceremonies in your hometown, but, and underground guides as well. But I just like to warn folks that these can be a little hard to find and vet. So you really have to be careful and do your homework when you are looking into these other options. You don't want to get in such an intense and vulnerable experience with someone that you don't know their reputation. And so do your homework, talk to them on the phone, try to meet them in person before doing any journey work. Try to talk to their past clients to see what their reputation and their experience was like, because, I don't want to put any scary expectations in anyone's head, but there have been reports of abuses of power in these situations. And you need to know that going in to keep yourself safe and to make sure you only do this work with someone that does this with integrity and has a good reputation and, has no, history of abuse, because that is very traumatizing. And I really just don't want anyone else to get in these kinds of positions if they don't have to. Yeah. So, but I've also gone on a retreat, and I've trip sat at a retreat here in Mexico, and retreats are powerful experiences. And there are some reliable retreat centers doing work with mushrooms. There's also, of course, work with ayahuasca and San Pedro and other things in other countries. And the group experience can be really powerful. So just do your homework. There's websites like Retreat Guru you can read reviews on. Yeah, there are benefits to doing this work in these more facilitated groups, but yeah, you got to feel safe and respected, and know it's reliable. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. We're getting to the end here, almost done, but let's talk about integration first. So integration, what is integration? I keep using this word and I never defined it. Integration is the process of understanding and learning from your psychedelic experience after the fact. So, understanding the lessons that you received or the insights, or making personal significance out of an experience. And then also kind of like translating those insights sometimes into like actionable steps to change in your life. If you see that something in your life isn't serving you and your psychedelic experience, you know, part of your integration is going to be trying to change that. This can be the hardest part of this work for sure, for using psychedelics and mushrooms for personal and spiritual growth. It takes just a lot of energy on the part of the journeyer, but it's really worth it. It can really help to take your journey work to the next level, and to learn about yourself in a new way. Because you can have a crazy trip and just like forget about it and sweep it under the rug. But you can also keep pondering it through reflection, through journaling, through dance, through art, music. You can go see a therapist or a coach, through meditation, through other spiritual practices. You know, it'll likely, you know, continue to give you strength and meaning and purpose, and maybe, help you find things in your life that you can change to live a happier, more authentic, or more, I don't know, content experience day to day. And community is so important for this work. And being part of the Psychedelic Society, like the Psychedelic Society in Minnesota, is a great way, you know, to have community. It's a hard time for community, but, you know, things like these virtual events still exist, as well as, you know, virtual integration circles. So if you've never heard of an integration circle, it's like a support group where you share psychedelic experiences, and it can be really helpful, you know, for feeling heard and seen and not alone, for comparing your experience to others, for staying grounded and not getting too, you know, not letting, I don't want to say not getting like delusional, but sometimes the experiences you have on psychedelics are hard to understand, and to talk about them in a group of people that have had experiences and will meet you halfway can be really helpful to start to digest them and to understand them. And just listening to other people talk about this stuff too, it can be so eye-opening and helpful, into like learning, making meaning out of your own experiences. Um, and there's also integration therapists and coaches. And so this is something that I do like to tell people, that there are therapists out there that you can be open with about your psychedelic experience. And unlike underground guides, a lot of these therapists and coaches are registered, licensed, you know, professionals. And so they cannot give you any medicine. They cannot give you any mushrooms or psychedelics. They won't be guiding your actual trip. But what they can do is help you prepare beforehand and talk about your expectations and your desires and your intentions. And more importantly, process them after together, like in a very much like a coach or therapy situation. It's the same thing. And you can openly talk about your experiences, whether they were good or bad or confusing. And your therapist can help you make meaning and purpose and find insight and lessons, and maybe help you find actionable changes or help you make a narrative to understand it. There's a lot of training going on for these folks. You can find these kinds of therapists and coaches on these two websites, are basically databases of people doing this work, psychedelic.support, and MAPS has an integration therapist database, integration.maps.org. But also, you know, there are some things you can do on your own. Like I was talking about journaling. I think journaling is one of the easiest things you can do to help maximize the benefits of your experience. But any way that you self-reflect, if you're not a writer or if your experience was hard to put into language, which is common, you know, other techniques, maybe art, maybe dance, maybe music, any kind of like embodiment or, you know, artistic creative stuff can really help. Spending time in nature is a really great one. It can just give you that, or like other ways to inspire awe. So for folks, that might not be nature, that might be going to the ballet or something like that. Not right now, hopefully soon. But, you know, any way to help you, give you that like small self feeling that you can get on psychedelics, which, you know, opens your mind to the big greatness of the world. Like you can find that like going in a cave in a national park or something like that. Like those experiences it can also just, be helpful to understand your own peak experience and to keep living in these incredibly beautiful life experiences all the time. These other practices, yoga, dance, music, art, whatever speaks to you, whatever you already have, or maybe you really think that you need a new practice, maybe sign up for a class before you start your journey work and start to develop that new skill. And then afterwards, you'll have it to, that new skill to keep using for your integration. And of course, talking outside of integration circles to friends and loved ones, especially with psychedelic experience, can be really helpful and really grounding. And just have a support circle where you can be open about this stuff is really important. I think also if you're feeling kind of alone in your experiences, reading about others. There's a lot of cool books on psychedelics. There's a lot of you can just read on Arrowhead and message boards. There's a lot of, or there's so many cool Facebook communities now, or other online social media stuff that can just help you feel more connected and less isolated. That can also help with your integration. And one of the last things I like to talk about are normal post-psychedelic feelings. Because there's a lot of talk in the media about like mushrooms reset your brain and then you're totally healed the next day and you just go out and be a perfect person, or I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that's how the stories read, and it's usually not that simple. I think that often after psychedelic experiences, it's pretty normal to feel kind of stirred up. It can be kind of a confusing time. If you think about that metaphor of psychedelics being like shaking up a snow globe, it's going to take a little, like that's what it does when you're tripping, right? And your brain's like making all these new connections, but it might take a little while for the snow, the dust to settle, and that's okay. Your deeply held beliefs can be challenged, things you thought you knew about yourself or about reality, and that can be, there can be a little upheaval after that. Past traumas, grief, guilt, unresolved feelings can be brought to the surface that you didn't really know that you were still holding on to. It doesn't mean that you're more depressed, than before, or worse off, or crazy or something. It usually just means you need a little time to relax, and that these feelings that came up, they might be things that you need to engage more in your everyday life. They might need to be processed. You might need to talk about them with a therapist or with your family or community, or journal about them, or just engage them more in your everyday life to deal with them in some way. Your integration techniques can help figure it out, but also just take the time to rest and reflect. I absolutely 100% recommend folks not making any plans for the day after their mushroom journey, whether it's your first or your 50th. Like, always take that day to just relax and reflect and to reassimilate, because you were in a very sensitive, highly tuned state, and you just don't want to just throw yourself back in the world, back to work after that. It's better. And I don't even like to make any social plans or anything that next day. Maybe I'll go take a walk in the woods with my dogs and my partner, but I really like to give myself that day to just relax, reflect, start to journal. And an afterglow is also possible. An afterglow can be this really beautiful feeling of strength and motivation, and a reconnection to the self. It can kind of feel like your depressive symptoms, if you had them, are gone. But it doesn't always last, and that's okay. You can just continue to work on yourself through your integration skills. And I also like to say, even though there's a lot of talk about afterglow in the media and stuff, sometimes if I had a really challenging experience where I just cried the whole time over something I didn't know I was dealing with, exhaustion is also possible. I can also just kind of feel like I have a foot in each world. I feel a little sad. I know that doesn't mean I'm worse off than before, but that this is something that now I know I need to keep working on. And yeah, it's really helpful. So that's all I wanted to say on that one. Yeah, sorry. That's a wrap. That is the presentation. In conclusion, there are more tips in the book, other safe use info, and just more, tips and tricks. And as you get more experience, you will discover things that you don't like when you're in that sensitive state of mind, things that bug you, things you love. It's a trial and error process. It'll evolve over time as you do. But the key is to be open, flexible, and accepting, but still prepare and take the whole experience really seriously. And yeah, that's how you use this stuff safely and with intention. You can keep up with my work on my website, michellejanikian.com. And I'm also really active on Instagram, as some of you guys know. I also have Twitter. I'm not as active. But yeah, if you want to keep up with my events and my other work, I definitely suggest checking out my Instagram. Sorry, I'm trying to find my mouse. But yeah, that's it. Do a little time for a Q&A. Ooh.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. That was a fantastic talk. You do a very good job of painting a picture with your words. I felt like I was right there next to you. I was like, oh, I can see exactly what you're talking about. And
oh, thank you. Maybe I chose the right profession. We'll see. No, no, that really means a lot. Thanks, Brian. I get so nervous before these things.
Yeah, it makes sense, but you did great. Yeah, so I would say if people want to turn on their video, go ahead and do that. We'll probably just stay muted because otherwise we might get a lot of feedback for now. Are you good, Michelle, on the slides? If we maybe go to like ending the presentation and going to a or something like that?
Yes, let me stop sharing. Cool. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great. Just so we can see faces.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Oh, okay. So we had a few questions that came in during. So I think just to be respectful of Michelle's time, since we have 20 minutes left, it might just work better if I read it out, if everybody's comfortable with that. And then if we need a little bit of further clarification, I may, either myself or Michelle may call on you to unmute at that time. If anybody else have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. I'm just going to do an order of when they came in. So if you have one sooner is a little bit better than later, since we may have to stop before they all get answered. So let me get my question list up here. Okay. So the first one was kind of answered in chat by our resident psychedelic scientist, Jessica, which it might be a little bit outside the scope of the presentation. It was potentially about psilocybin for Parkinson's disease. Like I said, I would think it may be a little outside the scope, but I don't know. So they basically, this was from Sarah, who had a person close to them experience resolution of early Parkinson's symptoms after beginning to microdose. Very specific noticeable improvement. Fascinated for what that may mean by others. So I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
That's amazing. I know that at University in San Francisco, they're going to start a trial, a clinical trial. That's how I put it in the presentation. I had a call with some folks at the Band Lab in San Francisco, and they're going to start a trial on psilocybin for Parkinson's. I think they're planning on doing higher doses and microdoses, but I'm not sure. But yeah, so hopefully that research will begin and get out there, soon. It's a little slower with COVID right now, but I think that's on the horizons. That's fascinating. I would actually love to hear more, but another time.
Yeah, cool. I did not know about that trial. That's interesting. So thank you. I'm glad that we brought that up then. Okay, so this is from DH, who I believe, or maybe I'll just keep it like that if that's how they wanted their name shared. But so the question is there any research or evidence that mushrooms can have a negative physical effect on the brain? Any chance it produces plaques or white spots or holes in the brain, especially concerning for those of us who want to take good care of the brain?
I don't think so, but I don't know if any trials that have looked at that specifically. So, I'm also not a doctor, but I've never heard of that in my research. In fact, I think, there are studies coming out more of like the opposite, that there's some neurogenesis possibly happening. But that's an interesting question. It's something that we should definitely be keeping an eye out in the research, but I can't answer that one. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's no evidence.
I've never read that, but yeah, I feel like that would be in the news.
Yeah. But like the holes in the brain, I feel like that came out of that kind of falsified MDMA data from back in the 80s, where it was showing blood flow and it was just different, not necessarily damaged. And that I feel like that's just gotten carried through for the last 40 years. I don't think there's any drugs that, well,
Yeah, that's more of like a war on drug, yeah, like a stigma kind of thing that sounds like, but yeah, I don't know.
okay, so I think it's Ali. So can two separate trips with the same dose feel like different doses?
Yes, I've experienced this personally. You know, even if it's the same like the same batch of mushrooms that your friend grew or something, yeah, I really don't feel like dose has a like any experience. It's a little mystical to me. I don't know how to explain it, but I do really feel like the mushrooms kind of have an agenda sometimes, and the experience can feel really different. It can maybe be biological, like you had different food in your stomach or something. You know, but something about mushrooms isn't very strictly like a skinny person drinks one beer and a heavier person drinks one beer and it affects them differently. I feel like body weight and stuff doesn't affect mushrooms as much. It's something else. I can't explain it, but like dosing is a weird one. And yeah, I definitely think two different, it's kind of unpredictable. People don't like that about mushrooms. Things like LSD can be a little bit more predictable with dose, but yeah, it's definitely possible to have two very different experiences on the same dose.
Okay, awesome. So this one is from Joe. So what are your thoughts on combining psilocybin with a MAOI containing herbs such as Syrian rue?
Yeah, I've been researching this a little. I mean, this is a more advanced technique for sure. Sometimes called Psilohuasca, mixing specifically Syrian rue and ayahuasca. Bet Williams writes about it in her new book. You guys should check out. But so I've never tried this, but what I've heard is that it can make the mushroom experience a lot more intense and longer. And that's why they call it Psilohuasca, because instead of like a 4-6 hour mushroom journey, it can feel more like a 10-hour experience, more similar to how the length of ayahuasca is. So definitely a more advanced like psychonaut technology, but you know, just make sure you use all your safe and responsible use skills and maybe start at a lower dose of mushrooms than you normally would. Also, I'd like to say about Syrian rue that the dosing of that is really important. I don't know too much about it, but if you take too high a dose, that can be dangerous and you could end up in the hospital with some kind of toxic reaction. And so you really got to do a lot of research on that and make sure you take an appropriate and low dose of Syrian rue if that interests you. But yeah, it's definitely done. It's out there.
Yeah, Terrence McKenna, who I think has been referenced once or twice, as it usually is when psilocybin comes up. I think he talked about one of the longest nights of his life was on that combination
it, it
specifically.
can be a kind of intense. People call it like, yeah, a little, it can change the whole mood. You know, mushrooms can be kind of like children is what the Mazateks feel like, oh, I make you laugh. But I think combining it with Syrian rue can be a little bit more like shadow sidey, darker work. That's what I've heard. It can just, it's more intense. So just yeah, keep that in mind.
I'd be curious to know how many people are dealing with Syrian rue versus something like Cappy or something like that. That might be interesting to see if that has an effect on how that affects the experience.
Next article. No.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay, so another one from Ali here. So how can I learn more about the different species or varieties and their strengths?
That's there's a great book by Paul Stamets. I actually have it back here. It's called Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. He you know, goes through like a ton of different species and their strengths in a really like easy to read way. So that's a great book I would recommend for sure. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this kind of stuff online. You could read about it. Maybe like join a local foraging group or something, not sure. But yeah, Paul Stamets is a great resource. So definitely recommend his work.
Awesome, thank you. So this one, from Todd. So Michelle, what are your thoughts or strategies for people in addiction-related recovery experiencing mushrooms? Microdosing, moderate, or heroic dose?
Yeah, well, I've written an article about this. Yeah, that is like a more complicated place to be coming from, from like either you're in like active sobriety or not, or practicing like targeted sobriety. I would say, dose is, I think, more important than dose. Always start in a low dose, but is having community. And there are specific communities for people in the sobriety addiction communities that are like outside AA, but starting to work with this stuff. And I would say maybe join one of these communities so you could be talking to people, getting some feedback, people who are in a similar experience. Because, that can be a little tricky, and there's like definitely a lot of stigma, especially if you're coming from an addiction background. But always start in a low dose and go from there. But yeah, I think definitely for those folks, community is going to be really important.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so a question from Derek. So Michelle, as you've become more experienced with mushrooms, has the trip experience changed for you over time? Is it deeper, more insightful, easier, more fun, or can it still feel challenging at this stage for you?
That's a good question. It can always still be challenging. I'm not going to lie. I do kind of feel like this is going to sound silly, but like I'm good at tripping. But then like if I say that, I want to like knock on wood because the mushrooms are going to like slam me down next time and be like, girl, you don't know anything. So, I do practice these skills that I preach, and I do find them really helpful. I do find mushrooms can be really fun. And even in the same trip that they can be challenging, they can still be fun. Or after I get over the challenging bit, I can kind of laugh at how sad I was about it or something. But, as you get more experience and you get more used to how it feels, I do think it gets easier. It's easier to accept the challenging stuff and to just kind of see it for what it is and to not fight it. Not to resist it as much. I do think you develop these skills, not exactly a tolerance, but you learn how to work with it, how to accept it, how you personally stop resisting, stuff like that. But it can always be challenging. That's just something you got to accept going in, I think. And then once you do, then it's like less challenging, maybe, in a way. I don't know.
I would agree with that. Okay, so this was sent in a private message, so just in case, I won't read the name. It doesn't seem like it's super sensitive or anything. But so I know you talked about nausea. So what are some of your techniques for dealing with nausea or stomach upset? Fasting, dosage, strains, etc.
Yeah, so fasting is definitely one of my techniques. And like I was saying, like I don't always fast for like that whole day. I'll often just fast for like a meal. So like skip a meal, right? So if I'm gonna have my mushrooms in the evening, I'll still have like a light breakfast, lunch, brunch, and then I'll just like fast for like maybe 4 or 5 hours. So when it's time for the next meal, that's when I'll just eat my mushrooms instead. And I do find having less food in my stomach helps. Also having healthier food in my stomach, and not just that day, but maybe for like a whole week, not eating processed food, junk food. And like I said, not drinking alcohol, not even like a beer or wine, with dinner, just really keeping my body clean helps. And then when you're actually in the experience and you're still getting nausea, taking deep breaths can help. Having like ginger candies or raw ginger food. Also, one of my biggest anti-nausea techniques lately has been making my mushrooms into a tea. So instead of eating them dry and chewing them, I like to grind them up and also clean and chop up some ginger and put that all in a cup. And then I'll pour some hot water over it and just let it sit for like 15 minutes, stirring it sometimes. And I consume it all like that, and maybe add some honey at the end for taste. And that really does help reduce the nausea for me. I recently wrote an article about it on Double Blind, but the idea is that you're starting to break up some of the chitin and the mushroom material that's harder to digest. And so you'll have a little less nausea. Because when else do we eat raw mushrooms, right? We're always cooking our mushrooms when we eat them, but psilocybin mushrooms, we usually eat them raw. And so it's just kind of hard for our bodies to digest. And that's where the nausea comes in. But yeah, making them into a tea starts to break some of that stuff down, makes it easier to digest and gives me less nausea. So those are some of my techniques.
Oh yeah, those are great. I just linked to the is it the How to Make Shroom Tea Ultimate Mushroom Tea Guide. Does that sound right?
Yep, that's the one. Oh, I can link you guys to the psychedelics and sobriety article. That was on Psychedelics Today too, if you're interested in some resources on folks in addiction and recovery communities using this medicine. Uh, yeah, that's on my website, but let me
I
try to
can
find
probably
that.
I could
Oh
probably
yeah,
pull that if you want to focus on the questions. I'll do that when you're answering the next one.
cool. It's in the article section of my website.
Psychedelics and sobriety. Okay, there's just a couple more coming in. So okay. So this one's from Sarah. So first of all, this is awesome, Michelle. I want to convey the enthusiasm as well.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome, Michelle. So how often do you recommend tripping? How do you know it's time for another trip? How much is too much?
Yeah. This is like a hard one to talk about, right? I don't want to perpetuate stigma, but I also want to make sure that, it is also not like you don't want to be tripping all the time, right? There's a healthy way to do this responsibly. So for me with mushrooms, I honestly only do mushroom work because it's some of my most profound work. Maybe like 3 or 4 times a year, like quarterly or so. And I can feel it when it's time. It is hard to explain how I know it's time. I just kind of like miss it in a way. I kind of want that homecoming. Sometimes I can kind of feel like a little depressed and want that remotivation feeling. But I try not to let that drive me because I could just see that not just being healthy all the time. So, but I do like to tell people, maybe not more than once a month for a bigger dose work. Uh, like I use other psychedelics sometimes. And so I like when I'm saying, yeah, I'll use mushrooms like 3 or 4 times a year, but I do make sure that even if I'm using other medicines and stuff, that I give myself at least a month before another journey. You just don't have time to really fully integrate it. And that'll be individual for the person, but I would say not more than once a month at the very most, maybe only twice a year. It depends on the person.
Okay, awesome. Um, and so maybe this is referenced in your article, the mushroom tea one, but so Allie had a question. Does warming the mushrooms in the tea change the potency or dosage?
I don't think so. So there is this belief that, yeah, like mushrooms, it changes the potency if you cook them. And I actually think that this has been proven not to be true if you don't cook them for that long. But I recommend in the article to pour hot, not boiling water, and you don't like put them over a rolling boil or anything. So like, I have an electric kettle, so I let my electric kettle click, I wait like a minute, and then I pour the water over the mushroom powder, and that's what works for me. And I also personally eat all the mushroom powdery bits. Some folks with anxiety or with nausea, they strain them out and just eat the tea, but I think that might affect the potency a little. It might be a little less strong. But the tea can make it kick in a little faster and actually feel a little stronger. And the come up can just be a little faster. And so it's something to also keep in mind if you want to try this. You can start feeling it in like 15 minutes instead of 45, and so it can be just a little faster to the peak. So just something to know if you're used to like chewing dried mushrooms.
Yeah, so I feel like this kind of ties into it a little bit here. Because I think you wrote the article on the lemon technique recently, right?
That was also me.
So we have a question here from Drew. Can you speak to the converting to psilocin with lemon and how this changes the experience qualitatively or in terms of intensity?
Yeah, so I reported this piece recently on lemon teching for Double Blind Mag, and I couldn't actually find a mycologist that could prove that, acetic acid actually does change psilocybin into psilocin. It is possible, but we have no studies showing us that. But it doesn't mean that lemon teching doesn't work. So what I think lemon teching is doing, or what the experts told me, is that if you have an acidic acid that's like similar or less than what's in your stomach, and our stomachs are around pH of 3.5 or so, I think. And lemons and limes are a little less than that. They're like in the 2 pH level. And so what they're actually doing is starting to break down the mushroom material inside the cup that you're lemon teching before you ingest it. So whether or not it's converting the psilocin, we're not sure. But what it is doing, similar to the tea, it's breaking down the chitin. It's starting to digest some of the mushroom material a little, starting to cook it like you cook a ceviche or an aguachile in lime. That's how you cook the raw shrimp in these traditional dishes, and it's similar. You're starting to break down the chitin. And chitin is this protein that makes up mushroom cell walls. Unlike, fruits and vegetables are made of cellulose, which is really easy to digest, but chitin is a lot harder. And so the idea is that the acidity is starting to break that down. And then when it hits your stomach, it's just like, it's a more rapid onset because you already have started doing some of the work your stomach would have done. So the experience can change. It definitely is stronger. That's the report of most lemon techers. Some say it's twice as strong. You can 2.5 grams goes as far as 5. But the other thing you should know about lemon teching, similar to the tea, comes on a lot strong and faster. And it kind of condenses the whole experience into a shorter one in general. And so if you're used to eating dry mushrooms, you can think of it more of like an extended release medication, and it takes like 6 to 8 hours to finish, or a lemon tech is more condensed and it'll be maybe like a 4-hour, and it's faster to the peak. And so maybe a more advanced technology as well, but it can also be a good way to make a small amount of mushrooms go farther. And a lot of folks also report it helps with nausea, although some people find the acidity bothers their stomach. So it really depends on the person and how you digest like acidity stuff. If it gives you heartburn, that might not be the way to go for you personally, but lemon teching.
Yeah, and we did get that article linked as well as the psychedelics and addiction one.
Awesome, thank you.
So we are technically at time. There is kind of one quick follow-up if you maybe just wanted to do like a
I have time. Please.
So yeah, if we I think we just have 2 more here. So okay, so the question, regarding tea, if you add, for example, 6 grams of mushrooms to a small pot of tea and drink half of it, are you still getting a 6-gram trip? Is there any way to measure this? So I guess on volumetric dosing.
I feel like that is tricky, and I might not do that personally because are you pouring out the tea and filtering out the mushroom bits? Because then, yes, maybe if you're filtering out all of the mushroom powder, maybe you could just drink half. But if you are leaving that in and eating that, I think that would be hard to weigh. And what I would just suggest is, if you want to do it if this is like for 2 people, split it out into 2 3-gram doses and just pour the hot water over them separately. It'll just be a more consistent, easier way to dose. I feel like if you're eating the mushroom powder, it could be this case where one person gets a really strong dose and then the other a really weak one or something, and that just could be a little, not ideal. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Yeah. If not, I think they'll type it in there. So this is the last one we have in the chat, so probably good to end there. But so, what do you think of combining psilocybin and cannabis?
Also, just like a more advanced technology. I think that often what happens, with folks who, like, first of all, if you do it, make sure that you're a person who's very comfortable with both substances first. It's a really common drug combination, but I think what ends up happening, even if you are really comfortable with mushrooms and cannabis, it can make the experience a lot stronger. And I think that it also kind of can bring out the shadow side a little bit more. It can make it a little darker for some folks. And if you are going in doing shadow work, like, maybe that's what you want to do. But I think that Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks, I did an article on this and I interviewed a bunch of people. Oh, we can link to that one too. Smoking weed while tripping for double blind. Yeah. And then a lot of people told me that they used to do it and they stopped because after they smoked weed, they just found that it like brought them into this unnecessarily bad trip area, or like they get into this like negative self-talk a little bit. And I just think that that's kind of like shadow side stuff coming up, kind of like how cannabis can bring us into that mind state a little sometimes when we're not mixing it. So yeah, and especially if you're a person that cannabis gives you anxiety, I would say probably not the best combo. It'll probably just heighten that anxiety. But a cool thing, the last thing I will say, also a more advanced technique, if you are a really comfortable cannabis and mushroom consumer, at the very end of your mushroom journey, can be a kind of cool time to incorporate cannabis because you can kind of like start tripping again after you smoke. It can kind of extend the trip a little. So when you're on like a bottom wave and it's hour 5 or 6 and it feels like it's wearing off, if you smoke some cannabis, it can kind of bring you back up to closer to that peak area for an hour. But you know, a more advanced psychonaut technology, and only if you really wanted to elongate the experience. Otherwise, it's not going to like ground you back to normal or something. It's probably going to just bring you back to mushroom land. But yeah, something to know, definitely. Oh, also some folks like CBD as like a anti-anxiety thing, and I don't think it does make it stronger or anything. I've heard folks say that it makes it easier to just let go and have the experience. So if you're a CBD person, that might be an option as well.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Sarah. So I linked to the Smoking Weed When Tripping Double Blind and then also to the Ulysses Press to get the book. Just to close, so are there any questions you wish somebody would have asked that they didn't?
No, those were really great. No, I appreciate all of those. And just for everyone for coming. This was super fun. I'm just, yeah, I'm having a really good time.
All right, well, thank you so much, Michelle. So definitely buy the book, Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion. Follow her on Instagram. It's definitely the more active one. It's a beautiful book. Um, and yeah, Psychedelic Society in Minnesota, psychedelicmn.com, or meet up and search Psychedelic Society. One more question came in. I'll answer that offline. So thank you. All right, so thanks so much, Michelle. It was nice to see you all. I hope you're all doing well, and we will see you again soon, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and Brian again for hosting, and the whole Psychedelic Society. Really appreciate it. This was great. Thanks,
Have a good
guys.
night, everyone.
Yeah.